the things that go with these features. I mean, think about, okay, I'm going to just make up a movie. Okay. I'm going to make up a movie right now in which the protagonists are American, white Americans. They are in Middle Eastia.
Mm-hmm.
And they meet somebody who is grown up there but is half American. Or better yet, no, they brought somebody with them who's half the native ethnicity but grew up in America.
Mm-hmm.
And that person turns out to be awesome at bargaining in the marketplace. And what does the audience do? They nod and smile and say, yeah, that's cool. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's an acceptance of these cultural features being inherent to your genetics that we find confirmatory in many cases. Now, in specific ones where it's wrong, the audience would not want that. But most of I think it's much more common to treat this kind of phenomenon in cinema, especially, and TV. I think it's very, very common to accept it. And it's really quite, once you spot it, once you're used to spotting it, it's really off-putting. You're like, man, if that had anything to do with, if that had anything to do with a character, African-American and European-American ancestry, I would find that really, off-putting. But if it's an Arab, or even more so Asian, half Chinese, half Japanese, right? As if all of a sudden it's perfectly okay for that person to have an affinity for all things Eastern. And we think it's cool. Or the audiences do. And I actually find that more off-putting than anything else. That's what, and yet the fantasy systems where you have mechanical bonuses and penalties to your attributes, or you have other things, just verbal descriptions perhaps, so that when I play my half wazoo, that it's baked in that very assumption. And maybe it's baked in with that assumption so that that assumption can be subverted by me, but that's kind of going out on a limb a little bit. So that's why I would want to play a game like Play with the Dusters and Undiscovered. Because in a lot of ways, the game leaves a lot of it open for you to build your character without too much of that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. To me, that's like a sore spot in role playing. I want to play half-breeds and hybrids all the time because I want to bring up this strong content. But the mechanical, quantitative nature of much of the way these things are parsed in role playing actually buys into and normalizes things that I think are part of the problem.
Yeah, that's definitely the case.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely what I see in the Gargantier case,
right?
Where you've got this really interesting thing with these two cultures in conflict, but the sort of mystical natives get access to the special mystical native skills that other people can never get, and the technology of the invaders is always better, and there's just things about it that are bake in things that you'd rather not have baked in.
And you said that the weird thing about this is that although every last little detail of the setting would imply tons of people born to parents of one or the other, they're not there.
Yeah,
yeah,
it is, and I think to some extent, I think it's. I don't know. I just right before this, I typed a quick response to your last message there. You have some races that they are like explained to be incredibly extreme, matriarchal that enslave the males, males that essentially treat the females as not even real. They're for breeding and for food.
Right.
But nothing about any of these cultures are all siloed. They don't.
Right.
They don't.
Right.
The rest of it, but there's no personal interaction of any kind whatsoever.
Yeah.
And even the PCs, there's like the word romance shows up as a goal you might have, and the persuade skill can be used for seduction of the opposite sex. And that's the only references I can find in the book to anything romantic.
And this in a game which kind of purports to address issues of race and culture.
Yeah, it seems to be like it's all about the what happens with the collision of these cultures and everything, and it just doesn't get handled.
Right. Huh. So as in a couple of cases, it's the raw absence which is telling as well. It's not just an absence; it's a weird flipped mirror absence in both this case and in Ramlar, I think. Cool. Well,
yeah,
Herman, were there any other examples that you had in mind before we close out?
No, not nothing really as specific as these two I could find. So no.
When we talk about in setting, in fiction distinctions that are at least matchable to the vernacular use of the word race, then, and with whatever justification, they're created by different gods, they're different aliens, whatever, I don't care. Then when you have the reproductive crossover, whether in population or as individuals, it is by definition destabilizing. In some games, they say, oh, it's just not destabilizing, it's just another thing, in which case you're kind of like, well, okay, but, missed an opportunity there. And then maybe it's more enlightened, but it's also boring and not particularly connected to, things we want to tell stories about. And then you have situations that are really real analogs to plain old human interactions. Things like Justifiers, where the science fiction is basically a way to rack genuine historical issues directly into your face. And then you have interesting things which put spins on it. And that's where you get stuff like your half-elves and half-orcs. There's an in-setting fantasy spin on it that you're not sure is squicky, or is it more confrontational and therefore more interesting, or is it just ham-handed? They just couldn't get it straight. What on earth they thought? They just wrote a bunch of shit. I mean, what is this? And I think it's a productive area of inquiry to get in there and play some of them. I know that I've got a couple. It's pretty obvious already which ones I feel like going in and playing. But I have in my heart of hearts pretty much less than 1% desire to go back and play any flavor of advanced Dungeons and Dragons, whether the first hardbacks or the second edition or the weird run up to second edition. It's just not really, I'll play Holmes 1977 quite happily. I'm not real up for getting back into that. But if I were, Volsifar and Locinda, the Wonder Years. The thought of saying, all right, everybody, we're all going to bring a copy of Bone Hill. We're all going to have the module. And now we're going to play them. I don't know. There's just enough there. There in them choosing those particular names, choosing to give them more characterization than any other NPC in the whole module, including the Baron and his family, who's carefully detailed in every other way, like what's in every drawer. But anything about them is manifestly uninteresting. So, every barkeep, every wizard in the tower, anything and everything about Bone Hill is bland as dirt. Even the secret is bland as dirt. There's like there's a wizard and a tribe of gnolls or some shit and a couple of weird undead, and it's just another monster.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, there's nothing interesting there. But
it's long ago since I played that.
Then you get to that one hilltop where there are these two people you might hire, and you're like, is that like the author's fantasy novel that's in his drawer? Featuring these two? Because these guys are really, you flip back to the page and you read the paragraph again, So,
Ron, you're going to make it so we can't just kill orcs for XP anymore, aren't you?
But we never did. I mean, I even remember playing it. I remember playing in D&D when the captured orc was babbling everything he knew, and the players were, of course, attempting to get information out of him, and the DM like played his wail of despair so well that, quite rightly, the players were just disinclined to keep mistreating the poor little shit.
Oh, sure.
I have to say that although I'm sure, and especially when you read the rules, there's all that business about, when you kill the goblin babies, when you kill the giant babies. Each giant infant is the equivalent of a third level human fighter, that kind of thing. When I'm talking about the texts, but I'm real interested. You know me, I'm real interested in the history of play. And we've got plenty of play in which, yes, looting and killing your way through the rooms was the case. I'm just interested in how much play went the other way. And all of a sudden, the orcs started to be characters, and then 5 years later, we start seeing role-playing games published in which that's the case. In which the orc tribe is, the tribe of the red feather out there, and boy, those guys are actually pretty cool. After all, when this is, again, getting off our topic, but in the fantasy trip, in the Labyrinth specifically, the big game, mechanically, unlike every other non-human race, the orcs were built precisely according to the same point structure as a human. There was no mechanical difference between an elf, between a hobbit, a prootwaddle, a troll, a dinosaur man, any of the other things you could officially play. I don't think you could play a troll, but all those others you could officially play. Elves, everybody. And each one of them had its point structure a little different. Not the orcs. So all the way back in, 1978, 1980, people were kind of going, orcs, man. Maybe we should play some orcs.
Yeah, or at the very least, maybe orcs are just green-skinned people,
right? Or interesting. I believe it was the in Melee, the precursor in 1977, the one-sentence descriptor for orcs says an orc is just like a human figure, except evil. And it has italics, I think. It says except evil in italics. And it may or may not, but it's written, but that's all there is to it. And I couldn't help read it with relish. Not, so then you can go kill orcs. It was, well, this is Melee. You could kill whoever you were up against.
Sure.
That was the point. This one was kind of like,
you can be
over here. Over here is where the good stuff is. You're like, ooh, but evil? Just like a human figure? Really? Ooh. So, it's kind of I think that's been present in the game. To use the term generally, the game of role-playing. I think that's been present way back. It interests me more if we do have them be the evil, abominable race. but we can play the halfling. That really that's when I get really interested.
There's definitely some of that going on in Gargantier, where there's, the other piece I think hasn't come up about it is, the PCs are all assumed to be part of one of these, adventuring organizations that are the do-gooders.
Right.
So there's all these cultural stuff, some of it really icky and a lot of stuff going on, but you're somebody else.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of them like that, where the adventuring group, we get to be all the different races, but by the way, we are, the Duke's special team of adventurers with our little certificate, and we've all passed the kind of test that says we're the ones who get along. So that's that's part of that American squad thing I was talking about on Patreon. So I think, well, anyway, okay. Good night, everybody, and thank you.
Yep. Good night.